Giles, thanks so much for coming on the show.
No, thank you for having me.
Most diets tend to fail. At least the evidence seems to suggest that most people will yo-yo or may not continue a diet for long term, et cetera, et cetera. Why do you think a standard diet plan doesn't work for people, and why are we in this kind of obesity crisis that we're in now?
I would disagree that most diets don't work. I think most diets we can't stick to. So I think there are some diets that are terrible. Alkaline diet, okay? But actually most diets probably work for at least some people, at least in the short to medium term. It's just the problem is the diets are sort of, if you consider them like drugs, they only work when you're on them. And so the moment you are off the diet, then the weight will almost invariably come back on. So most diets do work, most diets we can't stick to. And I think that's the problem.
So do you think that maybe we shouldn't be calling it a diet?
I think we shouldn't be calling it a diet. So I don't know. Diet comes from the Greek word dieta, which means a way of life. And so for forever, and isn't that beautiful, right? Because food should be a way of life. Now, when we consider the term diet, we're talking about exclusion. We're talking about what you're excluding rather than what you're eating, which seems to me not the right way to go about it. So I do think we need to change our thoughts around diets. We do need to improve our diets, undoubtedly, but I think we need to go away from exclusion and talk about what we should be including in our diet. That would be the way that I would reframe the discussion.
I guess because it used to be that diet was a noun. What is your diet?
Yes.
And now it's a verb.
Yes, correct.
You know, how do I diet?
Yeah,
I don't know, it seems weird. We've almost abused the word.
And made it toxic. We've abused the word and made it toxic.
I think most of us have an idea around why people are larger, but could you perhaps summarize in a more succinct way why there is this pandemic of obesity?
So I think there are two, look, I'm a geneticist. I study the genetics of body weight. And so you might expect me to say because of our genes. And I will say because of our genes. But I think the real answer is this, that the root cause of obesity are people with susceptible genes crashing into a permissive environment. Now, the permissive environment can be risky, can be unhealthy, pick your adjective of choice. But I think that's it. So you got some people who are going to be thin, whatever the environment is in, because what have you. You have people with the risky genes, and then you need those people with risky genes to meet a bad food environment, built environment, and you mix those two together, suddenly we have the obesity epidemic. And so there have always been people with obesity, just not at the prevalence that we see now. That is contemporary. The biggest change, yes, we have different jobs. That's a big change. We drive everywhere. We have dishwashers. We don't work in coal mines anymore. Those are big changes. But I would argue that the biggest change probably is the food environment, the kind of food, A, the kind of food we eat, B, the ease of which calories have never been easier or cheaper to get, both in terms of cash and in terms of physical activity. We don't have to go chase down an antelope anymore. And so I think those, but susceptible genes, risky or permissive environment, that's the root cause of obesity.
Why do you think most, I hate to use the word dieting again, why do you think most people's efforts to lose weight fail in the longer term?
Two things. Because when you are dieting yourself, so if I choose to go on a diet, then you are taking a personal responsibility, at least for the short term, right? And so whatever underlying biology or life situation you happen to be in, you are saying that, okay, I'm going to try and eat better and try and eat less. The issue is if the broader environment doesn't support that, okay? If when you're walking to take the tube to work or when you're going to get petrol at BP or whatever, and then suddenly you're assaulted by chocolate right by the checkout, and you happen to be susceptible, right? So assuming some people are susceptible, then it's always going to be more difficult for you to actually stay on that specific diet. So I think it is all well and good to ask the individual and the person to take personal responsibility, which they should. It's our health, it's our children's health. But unless as society we think about improving the food environment, then I think for some people it's always going to be just a losing battle. That's why I think.
And you can't legislate or mandate how food is sold to that degree, can you? Or could you?
I don't like the term nanny state, okay? Because obesity is a public health problem. And so hence, you need to deal with it in a public health way. Now, public health is an interesting thing. Public health, there's always a tension, right? And public health is a tension between loss of certain personal liberties for the greater good. We have to drive on one side of the road, we wear seatbelts, we stop when the light turns red. We can't do whatever the hell we want for the greater good. The problem is, I don't think we have reached this point, this comfortable tension in food and in nutrition. And the reason is because people are hysterical when they talk about diets, when they talk about food. All right. So there's a lot of shouting. There's a lot of this is my way or the highway. So because we're not having an adult discussion, then there are people that are saying nanny state, there are people that are saying they're libertarians, there are people that are in the middle. We need to reach some kind of balance that is accepted by society, because otherwise it doesn't work, right? Where there's a tension, where we will lose certain personal liberties. Maybe we shouldn't be able to buy chocolate in every place in the world, and maybe we need to, things like that. And we need to find that balance, and we haven't found that balance yet. So I think we can't legislate everything, because ultimately, if you're a parent, your child is going to have a birthday party. You need to go to a birthday party. No one's going to want broccoli for their birthday party because it's a birthday party.
It's a shitty birthday party.
Exactly. Or if your mate's going away and you have a go-away party, or there's Christmas. But it doesn't mean you have a birthday party every day or you have Christmas every day. Otherwise, that's kind of stupid. So I think we can't legislate everything within an inch of its life. But I think we're not legislating enough, will be my view.
Okay, just play devil's advocate. Why not restrict chocolate in the way we do alcohol? It has to be behind a desk. You have to ask a person for it.
Okay, so you could, okay? And I'm not saying we can't or we shouldn't, but is that going to be accepted by society? So we have reached a point where, actually, you're right? But cigarettes now, it's perfectly acceptable in society where you have to go line up behind a counter and you know that you can't smoke in a pub. In fact, when I go to mainland Europe, some countries, they just still don't do that. It suddenly shocks me that I'm in the middle of having a meal and someone else actually lights a fag. Perfectly reasonable, but like the smell and everything. So we've accepted as a society where we're willing to lose that liberty. A lot of people push back. If we as society accept that chocolate has to be locked up behind closed doors, me personally, I think that's extreme, but let's say we do, then that's the way it is. I certainly think that if you want chocolate, this is probably where I sit. If you want chocolate, you have to walk to the chocolate aisle and buy chocolate. I don't think that I should be able to walk to W.H. Smith to buy a pencil or to BP or to Boots to buy my paracetamol and be assaulted by chocolate, because I didn't go there to buy chocolate. I went there to buy a pencil or I went there to buy paracetamol. So that's where I sit with regards to the loss of personal liberties. But if society decides that we need to treat chocolate like cigarettes, who am I to argue with what the prevailing view of society will be?
I get it. I mean, I guess the argument, though, is that we know that even one cigarette is bad for you. One bar of chocolate probably isn't.
Correct. There are safe, and I think that's probably where this particular analogy comes down with drugs of abuse, with alcohol, and with cigarettes in particular. There is a safe dose of food, even chocolates. There is no safe dose of cigarettes. So
I just want to double check that you've subscribed to the show, because it really helps us continue these important conversations. Thanks. So why do you think, as a human, we are so resistant to weight loss?
I think that's an evolutionary question. The selection pressure, this is what geneticists call selection pressure, has been we never had enough food. I think just, not only as humans, I think broadly speaking, right? We are designed for a feast-famine environment, where sometimes there's food, sometimes there's no food, sometimes there's antelope, sometimes there's no antelope. So our general biology is to sort of ensure that you have a buffer against the time when there is a famine. Our problem now is we are in a feast environment. And so therefore we're not able to actually cope with that. So we've almost got a primitive brain trying to adapt to this modern world. I'm not a paleo person, just to be clear, but I do think that's part of the problem. So we are in a situation where we don't have to hunt down food. We don't have to work very hard for food anymore. And our brain, and really it was only, 70s, 80s? You can turn on a telly program now and look at a TV program from the 70s and 80s and everyone looks skinny, right? And people think, oh, that's because they were skinny. No, because there was not as many people, with obesity at the time. So this prevalence of obesity is a contemporary thing, and I think that's a modern thing. The food environment has changed really quite rapidly.
So from an evolutionary perspective, we just haven't caught up to the availability of food or types of food we have now.
No way even close. Because the food environment has changed so rapidly, and I'm not talking about agriculture. The paleo diet argument is that agriculture, we haven't caught up to agriculture, which is 12,000 years old. We have caught up to agriculture. What we haven't caught up to is the modern food environment, so-called I have issues with the term so-called ultra-processed foods. And actually probably the existence of Deliveroo and things like that.
Wait, you said issues with ultra-processed terminology.
The terminology of ultra-processed foods.
What's that? What's the issue?
My issue with once again, there are foods that we've got to eat less of and there are foods we can eat ton of.
Yeah.
Right. My issue with UPFs, the ultra-processed food definition, is UPF is a technical term.
Yeah.
Right. There are, if you follow the NOVA 4, there are specific technical definitions for what makes food UPF. So they're industrially processed. But I don't think they're a good marker for whether or not a food is healthy or not. So I think there are some ultra-processed foods which are terrible for us, and I think we got to eat a hell of a lot less of them. There are other ultra-processed foods which are ultra-processed, but actually are perfectly fine for us.
Can you give me an example of
Supermarket bread is going to be a good example. Now, once again, let's just be
good or bad?
I prefer fancy schmancy bread from down the road. They're going to cost me £5 a loaf.
Okay.
But I can afford a £5 a loaf bread every so often, right? Now, supermarket bread at whatever 50p a loaf, it doesn't taste great. It's not great for you. But is it actually bad for you? And I think that is probably the discussion which I have an issue with. I think it is such a broad, and 50% of our ultra-processed calories come from supermarket bread. It's just too big a range. So anyway, my point is that for the UPF is it's too broad a church. I don't think it's the right term to use to determine the health or unhealth of a specific food. I think we got to be more precise with our language with UPFs.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's just an interesting point.
Yeah.
So how much then do you think of our current weight is determined by genetics versus just the lifestyle impact?
So from the study of twins, okay, identical twins, non-identical twins, we know, so identical twins are clearly genetic clones of each other, and non-identical twins, you would share as much genetic material as you would with your own siblings or parents, 50%. So if you study a large enough cohort of twins, tens of thousands of twin pairs, you're then able to sort of work out heritability. So in other words, any given trait and say, well, how much is down to genetics versus the environment? And the heritability of body weight, so not heritability of being fat, heritability of just your body weight sits at around 40 to 70%. It's a pretty big range. But if you actually take the average, say we take the average, so it's 50-50. So I think roughly speaking, that's probably safe to say, where 50% of our body weight is going to be down to our biology, and the other 50% is going to be down to the environment, the food, the built, the broader environment you are living in. So huge biological driver, but clearly you need this permissive environment. You need this bad food environment to actually maximize the problems of obesity, which is, we're getting pretty close to that.
Okay, so just to help me understand in context, I'm an average guy in my 40s in 2026.
Yeah.
I'm an average guy in my 40s in 1960.
Yeah.
Excluding ultra-processing foods. But if I was just having a standard meal per day, what is the difference in the food now than it would have been 70 years ago, 60 years ago? Is it volume? Is it size, proportions?
No, I don't think. I think the volume is... So we can't ignore ultra-processing. I don't like the term, but within ultra-processing, there are foods. So I think we are eating different types of foods. That's the first thing. Undoubtedly true. All right. I think our ability, but the crucial thing is our ability to respond to our identical biological drive has changed. I'll give you an example. When I first moved here from San Francisco in 1994, I came to do my PhD in 1994. The supermarkets were not open on Sunday. Okay, so assuming an identical genetic drive. Okay, on a Sunday night in 1994, if I fancied a bowl of cereal, but I had no milk and I had no cereal, tough noogies. I'd have to wait till Monday. Yeah. Now, I don't even have to get off my couch. I can poke it into my phone and somebody will cycle up to my door and give me the milk and give me the cereal. That's the difference. And I think that's the biggest difference, because aside from when in evolution would that have been actually physically possible, or not when in evolution, when before the existence of Deliveroo or a delivery thing, you still have to walk to the shop to get it. You know, there was still some hunting and foraging element to it. To my mind, that's the biggest thing. Where our ability to respond to our every women need is so easy now. And I think, therefore, the genetic drive is there. You can then, because I wasn't starving to death on a Sunday night in 1994. I just fancied some cereal. I says, well, I'll have cereal tomorrow. I'll go to sleep. I'll whatever. I'll do something. I'm not going to be worried about it. Whereas if suddenly I know, oh, here's my phone, I can get cereal. See what I mean? And then so even with that identical drive, that's the biggest difference, I think.
I like the way you refer to walking to the supermarket as foraging.
Well,
I'm not sure, really.
Is it not?
It's as close as we get.
Okay, it's as close as we get the foraging. That's right.
Tell me about the calorie myth.
Because
this is your thing, isn't it?
It is one of my things. And listen, I am. Whenever I talk about calories, people think I'm anti-physics. Like they think that it's all calories are equal. I think all calories are equal once they're in your cell as a little poof of energy.
Yeah.
Poof, okay. The problem is we don't eat calories. What we do is we eat food. We eat food, and our body then has to work to extract the calories from the food. And depending on whether or not you're eating a carrot, you're eating a donut, or you're eating a steak, your body therefore has to work more or less hard to extract the calories. And your body has to work a hell of a lot harder to extract calories from a carrot than it does from a donut. Ultimately. So calories give you one piece of information only. It gives you how much food you're eating. And even then within a class of food, it is completely nutrient blind. It tells you nothing about the nutritional content of the food you're eating, the calorie.
So, but when you buy a carrot or you buy a Mars bar, you may be given the calorific impact of each of those, and you might eat it. Mm-hmm. So is the question then, well, how much of that is actually going to be absorbed, or how much of it is going to be taken up by my body? Because surely you'll get all the calories out of either one if you eat it all.
No, you won't. So let me give you an example. Okay, let's take an extreme example. Sugar. Okay, let's just take sugar for a minute. Sucrose, so glucose and fructose squashed together. It's a molecule. That's not the technical term. If you have 100 calories of table sugar, sucrose, you get close to 100 calories out because there's one cut. You chop fructose and glucose and we absorb it. You probably get 98 calories out of every 100 calories of sugar. Okay, so that's one extreme sort of. Now imagine if you ate sweet corn on the cob, and then you looked in the.
No, I know what corn on the cob is. I didn't mean to. It's good to have the gesture.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure you know. But if you looked in the loo the next day, clearly you have absorbed nowhere close to 100 calories of sweet corn.
Okay.
But if you take sweet corn, if you desiccate it, if you convert it into a masa, if you make corn tortilla, you make corn flour, you make corn bread, you suddenly are able to absorb a far higher proportion of the calories. So, and largely from the sweet corn perspective, it's the presence of fiber, okay? And that slows down, or your body just prevents, it prevents your body, or your body needs to work a lot harder to extract the carbohydrates, largely from sweet corn, from the sweet corn. Whereas if you've actually processed it, then it makes it easier for your body to do it. And I'm not anti-cornbread or anti-corn tortilla, nothing like that. What I'm saying is that you can take exactly the same food, not even different foods, exactly the same food, do something different with it, and you can get a lot more calories out of it.
So is calorie counting useful to help you lose weight?
I would think there are better things to count. Now, if you had a balanced diet to begin with, all right, and you just happen to eat too much of a balanced diet, shall we say, and you're larger. So if you were calorie counting that balanced diet and sort of reducing your meal size down by a quarter, of course you'll lose weight. Of course, right? I'm not anti-physics. I think a major issue is that I don't think that's how we function. So if you're doing a calorie counting kind of diet and they'll say, oh, you need to make sure you have 400 calories for lunch or something, then you'll go, and the moment someone says 400 calories, you begin to look at the calories. Then you says, oh, okay, now I've added up the 400 calories, but of what? Of carrots, of muffins? So to my mind, I think it is better to think about the quality of our food. And I would bet, I would put some money on it, where our major issue today is probably the quality of our diet. Now, once we fix that, we can come along and tweak the portion sizes. The major issue, I think, facing at least the diets in the UK, North America probably, I think it's the quality of our diet rather than necessarily the amount of food we're eating.
Okay, so if we have two people, they've both got a good quality diet. Yep. We're going to assume they're eating a reasonable amount of food, but they're both trying to cut back. Assuming they're of a similar age, why will one person find it easier than another?
So there are differences in metabolism, and metabolism obviously is the way, the speed and efficiency in which we use fuel. It's overstated. People think that your metabolism explains why someone has obesity versus not? Very, very, very seldom. There's some hormonal deficiencies that'll do that. But there are undoubtedly differences in metabolism. So that, and that's going to be true. However, the overwhelming effect for body weight comes from food intake. And I'll explain this. So if you have a chocolate bar, like a standard chocolate bar, it's probably 230 calories, something like that. And I could finish one if I'm motivated in like 30 seconds.
That is motivated.
But it doesn't matter how fast I eat it. I'll still have to walk on a treadmill for 20 minutes or something like that, however long. I can't speed that up. I can work harder, but I can't speed that up. So we have evolved to eat calories far quicker than we can burn them, because that's what's kept us alive. So metabolism will play a role, but the effect size of food intake will always completely overwhelm metabolism, which means that if you reduce food intake, even with a lower or higher metabolism, the likelihood is you lose weight. You'll differ in the amount of absolute weight you may lose, but metabolism will always be swamped out by food intake.
And it's true your metabolism slows as you age?
I would have given you a different answer 5 years ago. It does. So let me tell you, the answer I would have given you 5 years ago is that we reach we have very high metabolism when we're growing up, before we become an adult, because for obvious reasons. We hit 18. This is what I would have told you 5 years ago. We hit 18, and then we sort of are stable. And then by the time we hit our mid-40s to 50s, suddenly it begins to dip. So it's broadly the same. So the beginning bit's the same. So as you're growing, your metabolism is really fast. Okay, we probably stabilize around the 18-year-old mark. But then it lasts a lot longer. It probably lasts, the stabilization of your metabolism, till your mid-60s. Now, the crucial thing, it stays stable for your metabolism per gram of muscle. Okay? Right? So this is the critical thing. So what happens when you get older? Well, you tend to make more money depending on what you do. So you sat on your backside more, you eat a richer diet, and most people exercise less because they're busier or whatever. They think they're busier. So you end up losing muscle mass compared to when you were in your 20s or 30s, if you're in your 50s. And so you have an absolute drop in metabolism because you're losing muscle mass rather than because your metabolism is dropping. Once you get to 65 to 70, your metabolism does begin to drop. But this is relatively new science, right? Because people thought it drops, but it stays stable per gram of muscle. So what that means is that the more muscle you take into getting older, the better off you're going to be. We cannot ignore resistance training, is my point.
So we can counter to that is, you're saying I can eat more food if I have more muscle.
Yes, you can. You will need more food if you have more muscle. You can either say you can eat more food or you need more food. I'm going to go you need more food.
Okay, I'll go the other way.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. No, that's good. Have a suggestion for a Man Alive episode or thought about something said in this episode? Comment below and I read every one. Do you think that the supplement and dieting industry in general, and I don't just mean medication-wise, but I mean the diet world out there, has oversimplified weight loss?
I think it's okay.
Especially in terms of metabolism.
In one way, weight loss is very simple. Okay. You need to, at a base level, from a physics perspective, you need to somehow create a calorie deficit in order to lose weight. So in that situation, the how you lose weight, physics, which means it's very simple. The problem is life is complicated. Okay, we have issues with metabolism. We have issues with some people being more drawn to food than others. We have issues with some people are rich or poor. Some people commute to work. Some people have kids, work shift, whatever. So that added complexity. And some of it is biological. Some of it is behavioral, lifestyle, your job, right? That actually surrounds it. So I think this complexity informs the simple physics. And so, yes, I do think that the diet industry more broadly and any talk about nutrition is oversimplified, because while it's easy to measure the ins and outs, everything else is very difficult to measure. Right? Your lifestyle, the best we can have is postal code. It's just difficult to measure.
So then if I'm trying to lose weight, well, I need to maintain my muscle mass. That's an important thing.
Yep.
I need to think about my metabolism if I'm hitting my 60s. But if calorie counting isn't the way, what's the best way to approach losing weight from a diet perspective?
So the reason why calorie counting is so broadly used is because that is the big number that is on the side of the packs, right? Either the traffic light or what have you, and they include some other things, but calories play a huge part in it. No one's going to listen to me, but to my view, I think we need to be talking about the quality of our food. Now, what is shorthand for quality? I think shorthand for quality is not perfect. It's probably the amount of protein you have in a food. I'm going to caveat this. I'm not a protein max person. And the amount of fiber in food. And I think if you take those two elements first, okay, and consider, because now fiber only comes from vegetables, okay? If you take a food, let's take an example. Frozen food. I'm not talking about buying chicken or buying carrots. I'm talking about buying prepackaged food.
Okay.
And you might say, well, maybe you shouldn't buy prepackaged food, but we have to be pragmatic of what happens. So here's a prepackaged lasagna, for example. So you can have a lasagna that's truly terrible. You can have a fancy schmancy lasagna. I would argue that actually, if we knew how much fiber or protein was in a portion of frozen lasagna, and you compared 4 different varieties, and you picked the one with the highest protein and highest fiber, that would be marginally healthier than if you just randomly picked another lasagna. Because sometimes in life, you want a frozen lasagna. So I think...
Even if it has higher calories, potentially.
Now, even if it has higher calories, potentially, yes. Because the presence of the protein and fiber counteracts the amount of calories you can extract. So I think the calories is probably not the right number to be used. Now, clearly, if you have one that's twice the size of another, I'm talking like per 100 grams.
Yeah.
I'm talking per 100 grams. So in each of because sometimes life, you need a banana, sometimes you need a chocolate bar, okay? Can you buy a healthier chocolate bar? That's the question. Chocolate bars are never going to be healthy. Can you get a healthier chocolate bar? Then the moment you take every class of food you're doing, here's my fruit, here's my veg, here's my meat, here's my dessert. If in every element of your diet, you're thinking, can I make it marginally healthier by marginally more this? I think that would be a way, that's a way of doing it. So this would be my approach.
I think most people probably listen to your approach, one would hope.
I would hope. It's difficult because the protein amount and the fiber amount is written in very small font. And with my eyes, you need the right lighting. It's terrible. So I just think that we could make life easier for everybody. And I think the traffic light signals need to change to what we're traffic lighting. I would remove the calories, because you can see the size of the. I would add protein, traffic light protein amount, fiber amount, and then you can move down. You can say saturated fats, sugars. Okay, but I would focus on those two, and then there are a number of other things you can add that then rounds out the quality of your meal.
So you mentioned that the key to losing weight really is getting into a calorie deficit, right?
Yep.
You just need to have less calories in,
Correct.
and you will lose weight.
Correct.
I'm interested to hear your opinion on the current trend of fasting.
Okay. So I think fasting primarily works because it is a useful strategy to create a calorie deficit, primarily. The question that you're asking, obviously, is whether or not there's any additional metabolic benefits to it. Now, there are not a lot of high-quality human studies that are available. The reasons behind this is because it's very difficult to double-blind a human study on diets. You're either fasting or not, right? It's not like a drug. It's not like a white powder placebo. So it's always observational, so that it's difficult to do. That being said, the data from mice, which you can control and everything like that, seem pretty convincing that there is going to be at least some metabolic benefits to fasting. And so I wouldn't be surprised if the same is true in humans. I think the mechanism is this. It's the same reason why some people like the keto diet. When you fast, and obviously there are different varieties of fasting. You can do the 5-2 version. You can do the time-restricted feeding version. So you eat only 8 hours a day. And the principle underlying this is that you burn through your glycogen stores and then force your body into flexibility so that you begin to burn fat. This is the same argument for keto. And given that we have evolved through a feast-famine environment, that's what we've done. This is probably the natural way we work. Sometimes we have glycogen, other times we have less glycogen, and then we have to start burning the fat. And so we had probably this metabolic flexibility to shift between carbohydrate and fat burning. That is probably where the metabolic benefits for it comes from. As I said, it's always useful to have high-quality human studies, and that will happen. But I wouldn't be surprised if there was at least a subtle effect of metabolic benefits to fasting.
Have you heard much about autophagy or the concept of autophagy?
I have heard of the concept of autophagy. And autophagy is where you sort of increase. Autophagy is the way your cell, for those of you who don't know, the way your cell repurposes a specific organelles and fuels and what have you, something else. And so you change. That means I think you need to be pretty fasted to go into autophagy.
It kicks in at 18 to 24 hours.
I don't know. I mean, maybe a little bit of it, maybe because you're starting to burn some fat. I fear the autophagy bit could be a bit fatty. From a biological perspective, I understand what's going on. Is that really happening in us though, in every single cell? Not certain yet. I think the jury's out for autophagy.
So you're not going to start fasting with 24 hours yourself?
It's interesting. I did do a fasting experiment, the 5-2 variety rather than the time-restricted feeding variety. And I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And I hated it. A lot of people love it. And a lot of people use it as a tool. I hated it because, look, I love food. And I'm going to say this, I love food. And so during the 2 days of fasting, the variety I tried was I was on 600 calories for 2 days consecutively, and then relatively normal eating for 5 days.
Yeah.
I was so miserable during those 2 days because I wasn't eating and I love food, that then the other 5 days in which I was eating normally, I was so stressed about getting to those 2 days and being miserable again that I just was miserable the entire time. Whereas I tried another diet in which it was just being plant-based. I just went plant-based. And actually that was and I'm a meatitarian. It was far easier for me because I wasn't hungry. I just had to change what I cooked and did this and that. I lost a ton of weight on that when I did this experiment. And so that was, to me, you had to change your mindset and the way you think. I could not get past my biological drive for fasting. But that's me personally, because I think a lot of people do swear to fasting, and actually it's a useful strategy for some people, a lot of people.
Well, I think we do have to accept that, and you'll know much more than me in your profession, that individual variation counts for an awful lot if we're going to get mass success in terms of weight loss. So
individual variation in terms of biology, for sure. But for something like fasting as well, I think your lifestyle, your job. Because if you're working shifts, okay, or if you are doing a very physical labor job, fasting is just not a great idea. Or maybe some people do it. But I think you need another solution. I think if you're doing something like that. So I do think that your lifestyle, what you're doing, it has to suit both your biology, but I think it also has to suit your lifestyle, because if it suits both, the likelihood of you being able to maintain it is far higher. And so I think it needs to suit lifestyle and it needs to suit biology.
So assuming it's not your job,
yep,
and your job's pretty static and stable,
yep,
why is it that some people can go all day, not think about food, not even be aware that they need to eat? Others, every few hours, oh man, I'm still peckish, it's something in there.
So we now understand that the genetics of body weight, which is what I study, is the genetics of how our brain influences our feeding behavior. And we know of over 1,000 genes that function almost exclusively within the brain to influence our reaction around food. And so what do I mean by this? So for example, why do some people respond to stress, chronic stress, by eating, emotional eating, whereas other people lose their appetite the moment they're stressed, job stress or what have you? The same cortisol goes up, the same hormone goes up, but yet we could probably divide the human species into two: the people who lose appetite when they're stressed and people who don't. Why do some people appear to need more food than others? Why do some people, as they're driving down the motorway, drive towards yellow M's? Okay. Other people just haven't even seen the yellow M's. This is what I mean by feeding behavior. Okay. Now, it's not one specific thing. These 1,000 genes sit around the yellow M's, the hunger, stress, emotional eating, and you will have some mix of it, and I will have some mix of it. And different people will therefore have different drivers to food depending on the situation they're in. That's why. That's why some people are going, no. Food is fuel people. And I know a lot of food is fuel people, whereas I love food. And so I think about food quite a lot.
But we don't know why cortisol is going to make some people hungry and others put them off food.
No, not mechanistically.
It seems really random.
It does seem really random. So I have an physiological reason for why this is the case, but we don't understand mechanistically. So what is mechanistically? So what do I mean? I think why this happens is if you're stressed, it's unpleasant. And so the overriding drive is to become, to make things pleasant again. And so you turn to something that makes you feel pleasant. For a lot of people, that is food. Okay, it's one of the joys of life. For other people, it could be drugs of abuse, it could be alcohol, it could be bungee jumping, it could be marathon running. So I just think that when cortisol goes up and you're stressed, we turn to some behavior, food for a lot of people, which makes us more pleasant. Okay, so that's the reason why. But other people prefer to go marathon running or lift weights or whatever. Why? Now that we don't understand, we don't know yet. So could I talk about a molecule within the brain, a circuit, this, that? No. So that we don't know why.
Because I would have imagined if you are in an acute stress reaction, there's a spike of cortisol, because that woolly mammoth's going to attack me or something. This is a terrible.
That's different. That's the saber-toothed tiger. So that's different, because that's cortisol plus adrenaline.
Which will suppress your appetite.
That's tiger stress. So we all have a universal response to tiger stress. Yeah. Run like hell. We're not thinking about the burger at all, right? So all of us respond exactly the same to that. It's the chronic stress. It's the stress of which there's no tiger there that we'd respond differently.
Cortisol in the absence of adrenaline.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's much trickier. I was kind of hoping you'd give me a simple answer to that.
Sorry.
Okay. So how does hormones then, because this ties in nicely into the next part really, how do hormones play that role in hunger and satiety?
The thing about it is feeding are reliant on some of the hormones. So your brain needs to know two pieces of internal information. You've got extrinsic information. Internal information in order to influence your feeding behavior. It needs to understand how much fat you have. These are your long-term energy stores. And it needs to know what you're currently eating, what you've just eaten. And these are going to come from your gut, okay, and short-term signals. And they're pretty much all hormonal. And so they signal, and then your brain senses them long and short-term signals. But these same regions of the brain that hormones bind to, part of the brain called the hypothalamus, which you don't know where it is, bridge of the nose, base of the brain, and it sits right above the pituitary. That's one area. And the hindbrain. The rest of the brain is sealed away from the rest of the body. Those are the two areas of the brain that are able to sense circulating hormones. And so the same place which senses how much fat you have and whether or not and how much protein you've eaten also senses your testosterone, also senses your hormones, everything, cortisol, everything that's there. So the answer is, because your brain does not see one hormone in isolation from everything else. It sees a cocktail of hormones. So what really matters is that cocktail of hormones. And so yes, your mix of hormones will influence how you respond to an identical meal, for example. Okay, if you're more or less stressed, if you're more, if you're older, if you're younger, if you're a woman, if you're in menopause. So your underlying hormonal background will make a difference in how you respond even to an identical meal.
So I've eaten my burger. How does my brain know I'm full?
Okay. So let's deal with appetite. Okay, and this will be relevant, I promise you. So I study appetite. I study how the brain controls appetite. Now, appetite is an interesting term because appetite is an integrated term that involves three concepts. It involves hunger, which is sorted out by the hypothalamus. It involves fullness, and that tends to be the hindbrain. And it involves how nice you feel when you eat, the reward elements of food. And it's a triangle. So the appetite sits in the middle. It's different parts of the brain that does, but they all speak to each other, okay? So in other words, if you're fuller, you're less hungry. If you're fuller, you need a higher reward food and also eat, dessert stomach. So when you're actually talking about being full, the fullness tends to come from gut hormones, which are secreted when you eat, signaling to the back to say you are full. Hunger tends to come from either a drop in gut hormones or a mix of both, together with signals from your fat and then glucose, but that tends to go to the hypothalamus. So people think that one is the opposite of the other. In some ways, I guess conceptually it is, but from a brain circuit perspective, it's completely different parts of the brain. The hunger and the fullness, completely different parts of the brain and completely different circuits.
So what you're saying in this kind of triangle is then that you will get happiness or dopamine or whatever released in some way if you're eating certain foods, if you're predisposed to being that type of person.
You will
Or
always...
does everyone have this?
No, everyone will have some kind of dopamine release because ultimately there is some pleasure in food, even for people who use food as fuel, okay, who don't have a particular love for food. But if you're really hungry and you take that first bite of food, you still go, oh, right? And that's the nice feeling. That's the nice feeling taking over. Now, they will probably lose that nice feeling far more rapidly than me, for example. Now, I have a huge rewarding element for food, and my dynamic range of how I continue feeling nice for food is a lot bigger. And so I think that's where the genetics comes in, where all of us will feel nice for food at some point, whereas some people shut off that nice feeling sooner than other people.
Okay, what about the difference between, just clarify, hunger and appetite then? The difference between the two.
So hunger is part of appetite. So appetite takes into account how full you are, how hungry you are, and therefore how nice you feel about food. And that is your appetite. And it's a triangle. So the moment you pull on one end of the triangle, it stays the same triangle. It just shifts the shape of the triangle, so to speak.
Right.
Whereas the appetite sits in the middle. So it all speaks to each other. They're not, there are different parts of the brain, but they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, makes sense. So you could eat food that you don't particularly like. You may lose your hunger, the happiness doesn't work.
Let me give you an example for this, okay? Dessert stomach.
Okay.
Okay. So we know what that is. You get to the end of a meal, and even though you're full, you'll eat dessert. The question is, why is it specific for dessert? So you get to the end of a meal, and in an equivalent level of fullness, you're not going to order another burger. You shouldn't, but you're not. Whereas you'll eat chocolate cake at that equivalent level of fullness. So what happens here is if you are really full in this triangle thing, then you need something with a whacking, and then therefore not hungry. Then you need something with a whacking grape. You need a slap in the face in terms of oomph in order for you to eat it. Sugar, fat, okay, that kind of feeling. Whereas if you're really hungry, like absolutely starving, then a piece of bread, a bit of cheese, a bit of rice, really super delicious. And so therefore, if you're really hungry, you don't have to have a lot of, a slap in the face for flavor to feel, oh. Whereas if you're really full, you need a lot of the dessert stomach. You then need a chocolate cake in order to do it. That's how, in my head, I conceptualize it anyway.
Why do we tend to veer from savory to sweet? Because I feel like you can often go back and forth.
So we veer from savory to sweet for this. Now, there's, once again, evolutionary reason for this, okay? So 50,000 years ago, Serengeti. This is an antelope. Now, so imagine...
Is that a dead antelope? You're carrying it?
Yeah,
right.
carrying the antelope.
Okay,
carrying the
gotcha.
Antelope. Okay, so now if you had 2,000... say it cost you 2,000 calories to hunt the antelope. So when you now go back to the village, you have to eat at least 2,000 calories for obvious reasons, but there's no guarantee you get the antelope round, so the nice bit takes over. Here's the problem. How do you get past the difficulty of being stuffed mechanically with 2,000 calories worth of venison? Protein is quite bulky. You change the type of calorie you crave. You increase the calorie density of foods you eat. So for every given gram, there's more calories. So what is naturally high in calorie density? Foods that are high in free sugars and foods that are high in fat. Foods that are high in sugar and fat are desserts. And this is actually an evolutionary conserved thing, because if you they don't have to be sweet, okay? Grizzly bear, okay? Hitting the salmon run, so Pacific Northwest, Canada type area. So why are they going for the salmon run? They're going to build to get fat for hibernation, right? At the beginning of the salmon run, they will eat the whole salmon down to the bone. But as the grizzly gets fuller and fuller and fatter, it only eats the skin of the salmon and the fat underneath the salmon, underneath the skin, because this is calorically the densest part of the fish. So in order to continue stuffing food in. So desserts are probably a human-specific, they're not probably. Desserts are a human-specific cultural phenomenon, but the phenomenon of increasing the calorie density that you crave as you get fuller, that is evolutionarily conserved.
Great insight. I honestly just thought it's because I liked having a cake at the end of the meal.
Grizzly bear.
Grizzly bear. Do you have a mate who's going through a rough patch right now? Share this with them today, because one conversation can change a life. So do you think that the modern appetite, the modern Western diet then, has in some way disrupted our natural appetite and the way we would have eaten?
I think undoubtedly so. I think there are a number of different things, because we haven't expended as much energy. So In absolute amounts, I don't think we're gross amounts of food. We're not eating more than, say, the Victorian times. People have done the maths, okay? If you were a tin miner in Cornwall, okay, you were, with the pasties and stuff, you're probably eating on average close to 3,000 calories a day, all right? But A, different types of food, and B, you're burning the whole damn thing off.
Yeah.
So we're eating less. The issue is the foods that we eat are more calorically available, which means they're more easily, because of the ultra processedness. I know I don't like the term, but that makes it more calorically available. So I think it's a mix of both. The types of foods we're eating are different, and we don't have to expend hardly any energy now to actually get those calories.
And is this the reason why men in their more latter years, maybe 30s and onwards, start to develop bellies?
Now, the belly thing is an interesting thing, right? Because obviously, we know that our body shape influences our risk of disease, and men tend to carry this belly. And so, why? And we know that pear-shaped people, visceral fat around the belly is metabolically worse for you than if you have a big hips, for example. So why the hell would we evolve this stupid system which is going to kill us? The reason is this: belly fat, visceral fat, is far more available, is far easier for your body to access than subcutaneous fat. So there's slightly different types of fat, okay, where they store fat, but they are different types of fat. And so if you go for an exercise, the visceral fat the first bit of the fat that goes is your visceral fat. It's far more available to your body to use. Once the glycogen is done, okay, it uses the visceral fat, then it goes to your subcutaneous fat. So I think the evolutionary reason for men, now not every single male were doing the hunting, but I think it was a way of storing midterm fuel between your subcutaneous fat and between your glycogen. You needed some kind of antelope hunting fuel that you were able to burn and use. That's where the visceral fat has actually come from. The problem is, because it's different types of fat, it secretes a different cocktail of hormones. It's this cocktail of hormones that increase our risk, and inflammatory markers that increase our risk of metabolic disease as men. I mean, it's not unique to men in a sense where once a woman hits menopause and their estrogen levels plummet, they begin to have a more male shape because their ratio of estrogen to testosterone becomes to reflect more male. And so while women have less of a metabolic disease risk when they are reproductively, they're in a reproductive state, okay, a woman's risk of metabolic disease actually reaches that of men post-menopause. Men just stay the same the entire time. But that's the reason why we have this visceral fat. And because it's a different kind of fat, it increases our risk of metabolic disease.
So we can say that whilst women may not like it, they will tend to put fat on pre-menopause, more around the bum, more around the thighs, but it's healthier than men who, if either they have excess calories or they are low in testosterone, will just put it around their belly.
Correct.
And so why is it actually bad for you to have belly fat?
Because of the hormone, the cocktail of hormones and inflammatory markers they actually produce. So there are substantively different kind of fat. And we know that different kind of fat rather than geography, because studies done in mice, obviously, I mean, you have to do these in mice. And what they've done is they've taken mice in which you kind of generated them in terms of they have a lot of the equivalent to our belly fat, and they've transplanted it around. So they've moved mice with belly fat and gave them a booty. Okay, they started to put the belly fat onto their bottom. Just as bad for them. So just moving it, because people thought, oh, is it because it's next to the organ? Is it because it's next to the portal vein, the thing, and that's the reason why? Nope, it's the hormonal milieu. It's a different kind of fat because you can move it around the body and still have bad effects from it. Whereas subcutaneous fat is just a different kind of fat.
So tell me about GLP-1s. What are they?
So GLP-1s is a shorthand for a class of drugs at the moment that are being used that are modified versions of native hormones in our body, gut hormones. I talked to you about the fact that your brain needs to know these long-term signals and the short-term signals. The short-term signals are going to come from 20 different gut hormones, okay? 18 of which make you feel fuller. 2 of those are GLP-1 and GIP, okay? Now, they're called incretins briefly. They're called incretins because when you inject yourself with sugar, your insulin goes up. We know their biology. Whereas when you eat sugar and it crosses the gut wall, we digest it, there is a 6 to 8-fold enhancement of insulin secretion for every given gram of sugar. The reason for that is GIP and GLP-1. So they get secreted, they signal to the pancreas, insulin levels go up, which is why these drugs are used originally as type 2 diabetes drugs.
So you get even more insulin
if
you eat the sugar versus
exactly.
if we inject you with
Correct. So this is the natural way of things. But because they're gut hormones, 18 of them make you feel fuller, including GIP and GLP-1. So they let your brain know you're fuller. The problem with native GLP-1 and native GIP, these two incretin gut hormones, is that they have a very short half-life. So they're very volatile. 2 minutes and they're chopped up. So what these drugs are long-term mimetics. So they're pretty much the same hormone, but the drug companies have put molecular decorations on them to keep them in the blood for longer. So the half-life is no longer 2 minutes, it's now 10 days, which means that you now have a once weekly injection. And because they're around for longer, you have an enhanced insulin secretion and you feel fuller. You eat less, you lose weight. So those are what the GLP-1s are. They're modified native hormones.
And obviously we have been using them for a lot longer than
20 years.
Yeah. And the data for diabetic treatment is great, really, isn't it?
It is great. Mostly, so there are a couple of points. We have been using these drugs for 20 years, mostly as once daily injections. It's only the last 7, 8 years that they have become once weekly injections. So we probably have quite a lot of data showing that these are broadly safe, but there is a substantive difference between, in terms of the kinetics of what these things do, if you are having a once daily injection versus a once weekly injection. So we do need to keep our eyes open to make sure of it. But we understand the common side effects which influence your gastrointestinal tract.
And effectively, if I wanted to take one of these, they just suppress my appetite. What would it do to me?
At its most simple level, it makes you feel, so, okay, now with the triangle, it really pulls hard on the fullness side of the triangle. And so it suppresses appetite by making you feel fuller. And you feel fuller, you feel less hungry. And with the mix of those, you lose your appetite. So yeah, that's how pretty much how they work.
And then obviously we talked earlier that obesity and the impact that obesity has on chronic health at a population level is massive, if not
1 in 4 people in this country have obesity.
It's an enormous thing. And
Enormous.
I don't think politically that we address this burden in any way, shape or form. We haven't looked at the impact that obesity has on chronic health years down the line. You know, no one says, I know your heart attack was because of your obesity. Right. And I appreciate we can't say that directly, but there is a link. So surely the answer is you just get all these people that are overweight in the NHS and we just give them all a GLP-1. Doesn't that fix everything? Obviously, I'm being deliberate.
No. I know you are. I know you are.
Would it save the money?
So let's answer short first. I think that not everyone will respond, but about 80% of people will respond relatively positively to GLP-1s in terms of weight loss. So that would be a solution, and it would fix a lot of problems. However, I think there are a couple of things. In the more millions of people go on the drug, the more the rarer side effects appear, and we just need to know a little bit more about these drugs first. Okay, but let's assume they're safe. Okay, and we have to see this. The pricing at the moment is still an issue. So 1 in 4. Let's assume that we're calculating maximum penetrance of these drugs are going to 18 million people in the UK, which is a lot of people.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be a genius to do the math and realize that actually that is a lot of money for the NHS. Now, the problem is the health economics holds true. Because if we're able to at least to take even 10 or 20% of that 18 million people body weight wise, the amount of money we'd save on the NHS would be staggering. So I think the real answer is once the prices drop, and they will through natural competition and through patents falling away, I think that is when the NHS will be able to take it over and we'll be able to get it. I wish we could solve the problem now because I think we would save a lot of lives and a lot of money. I just think that's politically inexpedient and so therefore highly unlikely.
I think there's still a sense that people who are taking GLP-1s are not as valid in their weight loss as those that have done it via exercise or diet, and they're almost looked down upon as a result.
So there are a lot of people who think that. There are a lot of people who are taking it that think that. because there are some people who are perfectly happy to declare that they're taking GLP-1s. Whereas I do think that for a really quite a large percentage of the population of those who are taking it, there is a little bit of shame. Now, there's some people who are taking it just for cosmetic reasons, okay, and whatever. I don't think it should be used as that. But I do think that it's just, you see, the problem is weight stigma is so ingrained in our society. It's going to take more than one generation, I fear, to actually metaphorically beat it out of us. It's getting a bit better, but I absolutely agree with you. Where people, I had this comment. So my son is on GLP-1. Okay, I put him on it.
You put your son on?
Yeah, I put my son. I mean, he's 25 years old. He allows me to speak.
Right.
No. So it's not like he's 12.
Yeah.
So he also
the whole social services thing.
Exactly. Yeah. He also allows me to talk about this.
Okay. Again, also clarify that's good.
Okay. It was interesting. So he went to uni and then gained a hell of a lot of weight. Okay. And so he's been on these drugs since January 2025, and he has lost 4.5 stone. So he needed to lose the weight. He clearly needed to lose the weight.
Yeah.
Okay. For that. But when we first were discussing it, because obviously I didn't just gavage it to him.
Sure.
He asked the question. He says, first of all, he asked what I thought was some pertinent questions. He says, are these drugs addictive? And the answer is they're not, because of the biology of the system. He says, shouldn't I be doing this the natural way? Excellent question. What do you mean by that? And we're just having a discussion. And I say, look, these are just modified version of natural hormones. And so we're going to change 1 or 2 hormones, depending on what drug we're talking about, within your body. And your feeding behavior is going to change. So you could almost consider some people with obesity as having some kind of hormonal deficiency or hormonal response that you're trying to actually fix. But we have this, a lot of people think, wait a minute, how can you lose weight without any penance? How can you do it without trying? And it's very interesting to think about treating obesity in this sense, because we would never ask the same question about your high blood pressure, for example. Okay, people on high blood pressure medication, they're cheap, they're safe. First of all, no one says, why are you on high blood pressure medication? And no one says your high blood pressure is now normal, you have to stop the drug, okay? Because your high blood pressure will go back up again. And so we haven't got there yet, I think, with these drugs. And obviously body weight has a different type of way it actually functions. But it's an interesting thing to discuss.
I found, obviously from NHS, we give medications like Mounjaro to diabetics, and they don't have that same stigma. They don't feel the same shame because they have their medical reason for it. Can't we just say the same, that if you're treating someone with obesity, we're giving the GLP-1, we're saying, well, we're reducing your cardiovascular disease risk? But that doesn't seem to work as well.
I think a big part of the problem is our definition of obesity. And for the longest time, we've used BMI, imperfect, right? And it's pretty much a number on a scale. And that still is actually one of the key markers of whether or not you get the drug. You have comorbidities as well. I think if we begin to think, however, of defining obesity as carrying too much fat, that it begins to influence your health, then it automatically is a disease because it's influencing your health. Now, the complexity there is you and I can carry differing amounts of fat safely. So famously, East Asian people that look like me, South Asian people, Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, cannot carry that much weight before we suddenly increase our risk of type 2 diabetes, for example.
Sure.
And compared to white people, compared to Polynesians. And this is down to how much fat we can store safely. So I think we just need the difficulty is measuring the amount of fat you have, but we need a more nuanced view of what is obesity. And maybe for some people, that is at a BMI of 27, for example, because your risk, or sorry, not even 27, of 24, for example, if you're South Asian, and your risk of obesity is equivalent to someone who's a white person with 30. So we're not there yet, but I think we need to get away from simply the number on the scale. The number on the scale is a proxy for how healthy you may be. But look at you. I mean, you're going to be a certain weight and what have you. We need to have a more nuanced view of what obesity is. Then I think we get a better idea of what we should or should not be treating.
I agree completely. I think with time pushing on, I just want to touch lastly on this concept of the broken food environment.
Yep.
Because I think it plays into GLP-1s and how we look at this. Could you argue that obesity is as a result of failing politics?
Yes. Yes, I do. Okay. Because our genes have not changed. Our genes have not changed. Okay. We probably have exactly the same number of people who were susceptible to obesity 1,000 years ago, literally, okay, compared to now. And so what has happened is I do not think that the food companies, which we are all maligning now, originally set up to try and kill people. This was not their aim. They were trying to feed billions of people as they were going. It just so happens that in engineering and putting these foods together, we have put a system of cross incentives, of which some of the foods, they've gotten so good at us liking the food and therefore us buying it, that it's very difficult for some of the companies to pull back on this. So what we have to do is, the companies are always going to try and make more money. And I don't actually blame them for this. I'm not, because I think you have to a company is designed to make money. It's up to government to set the rules. The government needs to set the rules. They are not setting the rules. They have had multiple obesity strategies in the 30 years I've been here. None of them have worked because barely any of them have even been rolled out. People have talked about it. People have this white papers, blue papers, gray papers, whatever the hell color the papers are, and no one has done a damn thing. So yes, I do believe that it is a failure of politics, of having the cojones, okay, in order to do the legislation.
Good hand gesture.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
So if you're poor,
Yeah.
you're just more likely to be obese.
You are. So the numbers are this. I mean, they're stark, they're tragic, they're almost criminal. So the most dramatic number is this. If you go to the top 20% socioeconomically in this country, 10-year-olds, so kids leaving primary school, then prevalence of obesity at 10 years old is 13 to 14%. Too high, but that's what it is in all our households here. Now, if you go to the kids at the bottom 20%, prevalence of obesity at 10 years old, 32%, which if you do the maths is far more than twice of 13%. There's no genetic difference between rich or poor, accident of birth.
So why is it?
It's access to health. I think it's complex. I do think it's complex. But broadly speaking, it is a lack of choice as you go further down the socioeconomic ladder, where you live, okay, how much actual cash resources you have, what information do you have around the healthiness of food, and ultimately, the fact that actually the healthiest foods today in the UK are not the cheapest foods. So if you're walking into a shop, you're Mrs. Smith with 2 minimum wage jobs and you need to feed your kids, okay? And you got a tenner. Then you and I, middle-class people, we're going to look at the back of the pack. We're going to be discussing protein and fiber. You got a tenner, you got to feed your 3 kids. You're going to buy the maximum number of calories to feed your kids. I do not blame Mrs. Smith. And so this is the broken food environment that I think we're talking about.
Yeah. Do you think we could have predicted this obesity crisis decades ago? Could we see where this was going?
Hindsight is always great. I would have
I love hindsight. It makes me sound really smart.
It makes it sound
I totally knew that was going to happen.
Yes, I would like to think so. I think we knew the causes of obesity even by I started in this field in 1998, and we already knew sort of broadly the causes. We understand mechanistically, we understand more details. But sociologically, we have understood the levers that we could pull. But the governments, multiple governments in multiple countries have not had the incentive, the right incentives to pull the levers to actually control the element. I mean, I know people are saying it's nanny state this, nanny state that. Just to reiterate, obesity is a public health problem. We need to deal with it in a public health way.
So assuming I'm not at the lowest socioeconomic group and I've got a degree of flexibility in my diet, how much of this is individual failing? Or can we just say, it's all the government's fault? They didn't stop me having big adverts and they didn't stop me getting the drive-through and Deliveroo. It was so easy. The government should have stopped that. How much do we need to take individual responsibility?
I think we do need to take some responsibility. It's our health, our kids' health. Obviously, we do. But now the question is how much your genetic drive is to eat. Because I think, look, there are always going to be some people who use it as a crutch, okay? And we can't, some people are like that. So my view is this. I think there are going to be always some people that find it more difficult to, they're fighting their biology and find it more difficult. And so therefore, for them, they will need more support from the government to improve the environment. There are other people who, myself, for example, my wife thinks I should lose a stone and a half. She's right. And I'm not going to be, I should be able to sort of just think about things. And then there's some people who are just chronically skinny, okay? And so I do think there's a spectrum. So I don't think there's a right answer. I think it's a mix between your biological drive, your privilege and your capabilities, your access to resources, which makes it difficult to do public health. Because obviously the thing about public health is you try and say one thing and say that this is the kind of average. And I understand that. But I would like to think that as we get better in terms of measuring things, genetics, blood markers, all of the things we're going to do, and with large language AI models, that we should be able to be better in terms of trying to bridge that gap between universal health advice, which is very average and doesn't help many people, to more personalized advice.
What do you think the big developments in the future around obesity and weight management are going to be?
I'm a geneticist, so to me, everything looks like a nail, like a hammer. So I do think actually that given leaps and bounds in what we do with genetics, we certainly can begin to pull apart some of the mechanistic things better. And given that we're now in a state where it's quite cheap to do genetics, relatively speaking, it's the interpretation that's a challenge, but I would like to think we have a better opportunity to predict is a strong word, but to begin to segregate elements of the population into risk silos. And then, even then, we should be able to then begin to think, okay, all right, you are in silo A, silo B, and try and personalize. So I think in terms of the short to medium term, the next 10, 15 years, I get the feeling that this kind of precision medicine is the way forward.
Okay, last question we ask all of our guests.
Oh dear.
If there's one thing that you could suggest men should start doing today to improve their health, what would it be?
Variety. I mean, like literally, don't do the same thing every damn day. Don't eat the same thing every damn day. Don't wear the same thing every damn day, whatever it is. So if you actually try and do something different in whatever, your exercise, your food, your everything you do, some things are going to be better, some things are going to be worse, but you'll find out more. But most of us are stuck in some kind of rut. We eat the same kind of foods because it's easier. Variety.
If people want to learn more about you or find out what you're up to, how's the best way for them to follow you?
Probably Instagram, Giles Yeo, @GilesYeo, just my name. No numbers, no weird things. And I announce most things on there.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers. If you enjoyed this episode of Man Alive, you would love this one. Go on. Press it. Click now. Press it now.